Okay, good evening, everyone, and a welcome to today's quarterly business report briefing for Q4, focusing today on innovation in Greater Birmingham. My name is Henrietta Freely. I'm the Chief Executive of the Greater Birmingham Chambers of Commerce. And for those of you who haven't tuned in for a QBR briefing before, for background, our quarterly business report is the largest regional regular business sentiment survey of its kind. And it's a bit of our sort of temperature check, our thermometer to tell us what's happening across the business community over the region. What's up, what's down, what's sideways, what are the latest concerns and opportunities, how are trends looking across the time period in question. So we have got a busy agenda for you today, as well as looking at our QBR results. We're also going to be hearing from Dr. Barney on the latest public health situation around coronavirus. Before we introduce our guest speakers, the theme of innovation in Greater Birmingham, Ali Bell from National Express and Tracy Westall, wearing a number of different hats, but in particular as chair of Curium Solutions, to talk a little bit about the innovation agenda in the city. As always, if you've got any questions, pop them in the chat and we'll come to them during the Q&A. And without further ado, I'd like to hand over to our sponsor, the people who make all of this possible and a fantastic partner for us on the quarterly business report, Joanna Birch from Birmingham City University. Over to you, Jo.
Thanks, Henrietta, and it's just fantastic to have so many people on today's webinar. And I was just thinking about innovation. Innovation sounds amazing, doesn't it? But many individuals ask me, what the hell does it mean? In simple terms, I like to think of it as creating a sustainable new offering, thinking about new services, new products, or perhaps just doing things a bit differently so that your business can thrive. And that can be delivered long term without affecting your business. But I think recently we've had so many challenges, haven't we? Omicron, oh my word, as if we hadn't had enough of COVID already. And it'd be really great to hear from Justin. But we at BCU have also experienced those challenges, and we've been innovating. And I've got behind me our portal, which we had to develop as a result of our Steamhouse project so that we could carry on helping members innovate. The key thing to innovation is trying to understand what your customers want, what problems they face, and then working with people who can help you bring those ideas to reality. Government have published the new innovation strategy, which is going to go on to 2035. They've talked about unleashing business, providing £22 billion. That sounds like a fantastic amount of money, but if you as a business are trying to work out how practically do I get hold of that money? How do I work with these people? How do I make my ideas come to reality? That innovation strategy might feel a bit of a long way away. So it's fantastic you're on today's webinar, because ultimately you're going to meet a few people who can give you some practical tips about how to bring innovation to reality. But innovation is important. Our economy has been through a shock. It is important that we think about how we address the regional priorities. And BCU is thinking about that too. We're proud that last year we achieved the Investor and Innovation Standards from the Institute of Knowledge Exchange, and we will be rolling out this year a new certificate in innovation practice. So if you're wondering how to do innovation, that might be something for you. We're also one of Innovate UK's leading provider of knowledge transfer partnerships, one of the biggest growers last year. And we're working with small businesses to see how we can help them grow that bottom line. In addition to that, we're offering some practical support. Our Create programme that you can find out on steamhouse.org.uk has already supported 114 enterprises, and 22 have already brought products and services to market. So we're not just theory, we're practice too. And then finally, our STEAM incubator is now open. And you can talk a little bit more to Richard Scott, who's leading that area. We've got 16 business clients already in the incubator. They've got 40 employees. And over the last year, we've helped 250 graduates to start their own business. We're part of a wide range of educational institutions that's really passionate about innovation. And we work with a range of partners, solicitors, financial organisations, and institutions like the Chamber, who are crucial to that innovation ecosystem to drive us forward. We really hope that you call upon that ecosystem to make your business grow. I think there's something powerful we can do together. I hope you enjoy today's webinar, and it's a real joy to sponsor such an important activity where we get to reflect how the economy is doing. Back to you, Henrietta.
Fantastic. Thank you, Jo. And as leaders in innovation in the city, it really is brilliant that we're working with you at BCU, who do so much in this space on this particular event. And there's lots there for audience members to get involved in. So we are now going to hand over to my colleague, Raj Kandola, Head of Policy at the Greater Birmingham Chambers of Commerce, or as I like to call him, the brains of the Chamber, to talk us through the latest QBR results, what we're seeing and hearing from businesses. Over to you, Raj.
Thanks, Henrietta. Good evening, everyone. Before we head into and go through the results, I'll just wait for my colleague Jess to bring up the slides. So some background before we go into the results themselves. So the quarterly business report is set by the British Chambers of Commerce. It's been around since 1989, and we've had the digital data set since 97. And our survey covers 6 geographical areas. That's Birmingham, Burton, Chase, Lichfield, Tamworth, Solihull and Sutton. The survey took place between the 1st and the 22nd of November, so before the onset and spread of the Omicron variant. And we received 256 responses. And what we do is we go out to businesses and ask them a set of questions around domestic demand, export demand, recruitment intentions, but also any concerns that firms might be facing. And we use a balance score approach. So put simply, we take the percentage of firms that have indicated growth in an area, times that by 1, take the percentage of firms that have reported constancy at an output and times that by 0.5, and we take the percentage of firms that have reported a decrease in an output and times that by 0. And that gives us an overall balance score figure. And if that figure is over 50, that's indicative of growth. If it's under 50, then we are in negative territory. Next slide, please.
Jess, I think you're having a bit of an issue sharing the slides from today. It's still showing us the PowerPoint. So if you could move to the next slide on the PowerPoint screen and just reduce the size of the notes of the sidebar so everyone can see that slide nice and clear. We will do that as a quick workaround if we're having a bit of an issue sharing presentations today.
Can you see that?
We can. We can also see the notes underneath. Can you turn that into the slideshow option?
I'm not sure what it's doing, but every time I seem to share, it's just going back to the beginning.
Okay, we can work with this. So let's start with domestic sales then. So domestic sales refers to UK business that's taken place over the previous 3 months. And as you can see, looking at the graph on the left-hand side, the QBR index combined, the overall figure for the 2 sectors combined has gone up by 2 points to a figure of 72, which is the highest figure we've had in the 25-year history of the report, which is great to see. A slightly different scenario in the individual sectors. The manufacturing balance score fell by 7 points compared to Q3 to a figure of 65. That's because we saw a greater number of manufacturers reporting a decrease in domestic sales this quarter. By contrast, the service sector balance score went up by 4 points compared to Q3 to a figure of 74. And again, that's due to the fact that we saw a greater number of service firms reporting an increase in their domestic sales this quarter, which again, perhaps is due to the fact that a number of national restrictions were eased towards the second half of last year. Next slide, please. So moving on to export sales. So export sales refers to international business that's taken place over the previous 3 months. And again, looking at the graph on the left-hand side, at the QBR index combined, you can see a minor 1 point upturn there to a figure of 61, which again is in line with what we saw prior to the outbreak of the pandemic, which is good to see. Again, slightly different story in the individual sectors. The manufacturing balance score went up by 3 points to 64. That's again because we saw a greater number of manufacturers reporting an increase in their export sales, whereas with the service balance score, that fell by 1 point to a figure of 58. And that's because we saw a greater number of service firms reporting constancy in their export sales this quarter. Next slide, please. Moving on to workforce and recruitment trends. So the graph you can see on the left-hand side, the blue bars represent the workforce balance score for the last 3 months. So running all the way back to Q1 2019. The red bars, they represent workforce balance scores for the next 3 months. Looking at the Q4 right at the end, you can see the blue bar has gone up by 3 points to a figure of 64. So that's the last 3 months recruitment has picked up. And looking ahead to the next 3 months, that figure is also up as well to a figure of 73, which is good to see. 60% of firms attempted to recruit, which is 3% higher than last quarter. But of those, 76% face recruitment difficulties, which is a 14% increase compared to Q3. And again, just shows you the challenges that firms are facing in trying to hire the right candidates at the minute. Next slide, please. Moving on to cash flow and price pressures. So the red line that you can see on the graph on the left-hand side, that refers to the cash flow balance score. And that indicator actually has gone up by 5 points to a figure of 57, which is one of the highest that we've seen in a number of years. You can look at that red line, you can see it was hovering around the 50 mark even before the onset of the pandemic. And again, just reiterates the ongoing issues that firms have faced in relation to cash flow for a number of years. Now, the blue line at the top of the graph, that's the indicator for price pressures. So the balance score for price pressures, and that in itself went up by 4 points. Now, that's the one indicator that you want to be as low as possible, because the greater the number of firms that are under pressure to raise their prices, the higher that score is. Well, that figure actually went up to a figure of 75, which again is one of the highest that we've seen in the 25-year history of the report. As to the reasons as to why firms are under pressure to raise their prices, 36% cited other overheads. So that could be anything from legal fees, recruitment fees, taxation, but 17% cited finance costs, which is a 3% increase compared to the last quarter. Next slide, please. So moving on to investment intentions. So the graph you can see on the left-hand side, the blue bars, that refers to the training balance score. So that's the investment that firms are making in training. And that also went up as well by 2 points to a figure of 61, which again, continuing that upward climb since we saw it since the start of the pandemic. The red bars you can see there, that's the index for capital expenditure. And that also went up by 1 point to a figure of 57. So good to see on both fronts that investment in training and CapEx has started to climb since the middle of 2020. And again, is similar to levels that we saw just before the onset of the pandemic. Next slide, please. Moving on to business concerns. So we ask a question related to which of the following factors are more of a concern than 3 months ago. And you can see the options listed in the table on the left-hand side. No surprise, given what we've been talking about today around price pressures, that inflation came out way ahead at 33%. And that's actually 11% higher than we saw compared to last quarter. In second place, 19% cited taxation, which in itself is actually 8% lower than last quarter. But given the fact that we're expected to see national insurance rises next quarter, we suspect that figure will go up again in Q1. Next slide, please. And then moving on to business confidence. The red line you can see on the graph on the left-hand side, that relates to the index for profitability. And that figure actually fell by 3 points to 73, but that's still a very healthy overall figure, given the fact that in the midst of the pandemic, that had dropped to around 40. By contrast, the blue line above, that's the index for turnover, and that went up by 1 point to a figure of 82, which is the highest on record since the start of 2017. So one thing to take away is, despite the challenges that firms are facing right now, the majority do expect their profits and turnover to go up over the next 12 months. Next slide, please. Now, I mentioned obviously that we've run the survey for 25 years, and the beauty of doing so is that we can examine historical data, explore historical data, and compare it to what's happening in the current time. And what you can see there on the graph in front of you, that's an analysis of the price index balance scores going back to 2007. So that green line is the index for the price balance score. And what we've got on those black lines, the dotted black lines, are just some of the key points that we've seen where we've seen quite a big fluctuation in that price balance score. Now, if you track it back to Q1 2009, the first dotted line on the left-hand side, you can see quite a sharp drop there in the number of firms that were under pressure to raise prices. So prices fell, which is normally the case during a recession. As you know, there's less demand, less things being produced, so firms can sometimes drop their prices in order to try and shift goods. We saw a similar thing happen in Q3 2012 when Britain was faced with the threat of a double dip recession. Obviously, the price balance score bounced back pretty quickly after that. But on the flip side, you can see in Q1 2017, the third dotted line, quite an upturn there. And I think that could be related to the fact that once Britain voted to leave the European Union in 2016, the value of the pound dropped quite sharply, which meant it was more costly to import raw materials, which again meant higher prices all round. And then bringing it on to more recent times, Q2 2020, you can see there at the start of the pandemic, when the economy went into temporary stasis, the prices dropped. Of course, as we said, when it's related to a recession, that does happen. But what's actually quite startling to see is just how quickly that index has risen and is continuing to rise. As I mentioned, that figure is at 75, which is the highest we've seen in 25 years. And you know, if you take into account the impact of COVID, whether it's labour market shortages, which we've discussed earlier, supply chain bottlenecks, there's other external factors to take into account as well, such as the energy crisis, higher energy prices, but also the impact of Brexit, border delays, and obviously the associated costs with that. I think in the next few weeks, and obviously as we know, Plan B measures have been taken away, and so I think we are likely to see a growth in economic activity in the next few weeks, particularly as people start spending more and going out more. But what we really need to be concerned about and keep an eye on is obviously inflation, because the higher that inflation goes up, the less that people have to spend. Obviously, it erodes consumer spending power, which in itself will hinder a long-term economic recovery. Next slide, please. So to summarize then, so a very strong quarter in terms of domestic sales, which is good to see. However, we should take into account that this survey took place before the spread of Omicron and the introduction of Plan B measures. So it'll be interesting to see how that indicator changes over the next few weeks and into Q1. A strong increase in export sales, which is good to see. Continued growth in investment in training and CapEx investment as well. As I said, profitability and turnover projections remain strong, which is also positive. But of course, the big concern right now is what's happening with price pressures and inflation as well. Next slide, please. And then finally, of course, if you do have any specific questions about any of the government support mechanisms which are open right now to help businesses get through the pandemic, if you visit our COVID-19 hub on the website, you'll see plenty of details on there on the various schemes which are open, such as the latest Omicron grant, the business rates relief scheme, but also the recovery loan scheme, which obviously, as you know, replaced schemes such as the bounce back loans and CBILS as well. So on there, you'll see details of the schemes themselves, how you can access them and when they're available from. And if you have any specific questions or if you'd like any further information, do reach out to either myself or one of my colleagues on the policy team. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Raj. And I can see we've had a couple of questions come through on the chat and the Q&A. We will come back to those later. But audience, please do, as soon as questions spring to mind, drop them in the chat. We'll gather them all and come back to those with a bit of discussion later. I'm now going to bring in Dr. Justin Barney, Director of Public Health for Birmingham City Council. Those who have been regulars on this call will have heard Justin speak a number of times. He's always incredibly erudite and clear on the latest for the COVID situation, which is no mean feat given how quickly it all moves. And today he's going above and beyond in terms of public service and has actually dialed in for his holiday in New York. So thank you so much for joining us, Justin. Over to you.
Great, thanks, Henrietta. Hi, colleagues. So I'm not going to use slides today. I'm just going to talk to you a little bit about where we are in terms of the pandemic. And obviously, the Prime Minister has made some announcements today, so I'll give you a couple of reflections, but I am conscious the Health Secretary is currently doing a press conference, so I have got one eye on the BBC to see what's coming through those lines as well. So in terms of where we're up to at the moment, we did see a very sharp spike in terms of cases due to the Omicron variant at the beginning of January. That is now starting to come down. And what's reassuring is that testing rates are remaining high in Birmingham, but we also monitor the amount of virus that we see in the wastewater from people's toilets across the city. And that helps us make sure that what we're seeing from testing and what we're seeing in the wastewater are running in the same direction. It's not a perfect tool, but it does give us quite a good steer about whether we're seeing the true story in essence. And at the moment, they are heading in the same direction, which is fortunately down. However, it is important to keep in mind that the case rates at the moment are still significantly higher than they were in January last year. So although it is improving, we are not out of the woods yet. And it is important that whether there are fines in place or not, we continue to act responsibly when it comes to COVID, and particularly the highly infectious Omicron. The reason that the government has made this decision, I think the reason it does make sense to relax further, is that when we look at what's happening in hospitals, and what we're seeing in hospitals now is really a reflection of what was happening in the community about 2 to 3 weeks ago. So we're really now starting to see the impact of the Omicron surge after Christmas playing out in hospitals. And although we have seen increase in the number of people going into hospital, actually the number of people who require mechanical ventilation, who needs a machine to breathe for them, has dropped significantly compared to the previous waves. And similarly, when we look at deaths, which come about another 2 weeks later in the journey, those are also staying very low. So that is telling us that although vaccination is not perfect, and against Omicron it is less effective than it was against Delta, it is still holding the line in terms of reducing the pressure on the NHS, and that's really good news. And to put that in kind of some perspective, and this is early figures about Omicron, what we've seen is that for individuals who are double vaccinated, they're getting about 60% protection if it's Pfizer, about 40 to 50% protection if it's AstraZeneca, and that's protection against symptomatic disease, and about 55% protection against hospitalization. With the booster, that raises it up to about 60 to 70% protection against symptomatic disease, and just under 90% protection against ending up in hospital. And that's now growing each week as we see more Omicron, both here and in Europe. We see yet more and more evidence that the vaccine is doing exactly what it says on the tin, which is stopping people getting severely unwell and stopping them dying. What the vaccine doesn't do perfectly is stop you catching it and stopping you passing it on. And that's why, even if the fines go, it is important we all keep up washing our hands, keeping face coverings on when we're in closed spaces, keep ventilating spaces, because there is a real risk that things will surge back up. And the protection we have from the vaccine is really what's allowing this freedom. So we've got to respect that, I think, by keeping up some of the positive behaviours. What we also know now is even more evidence around the safety of the vaccine, that your risk of having a blood clot from the vaccine is about 4 in a million doses. So 4 in a million people who have a vaccine end up with a serious blood clot. That compares with 165,000 people out of every million that catch COVID. So it's the vaccine is much, much safer than catching COVID. I know some people are also concerned about the risk of inflammation of the heart, a condition called myocarditis. Again, we now got good evidence coming from particularly the US, when there are a much larger number of people being vaccinated, that there are about 40 cases of myocarditis in a million people, for every million people that have COVID infection. There are about 10 that are attributed to the vaccine. So it's, again, massive difference when you look at the risk. And some of the vaccines, particularly if you look at Pfizer, for example, there's only 1 case per every million compared to 40 from COVID. So the vaccines that we use in the UK, AstraZeneca and Pfizer, have a lower risk of myocarditis than Moderna, which is the one that's used more in the US. We also now have good evidence that's built on the evidence we had to begin with, that the vaccines are very safe in pregnancy, and that there is a high risk that if people catch COVID when they're pregnant, they are more likely to have a premature delivery and more likely to have a stillbirth. So there's been a lot of push on particularly trying to promote vaccination for pregnant women and children. So at every age, vaccine makes sense. And when we look at the rate of hospitalization, for example, even if you look at 18 to 29-year-olds, a group that aren't particularly likely to end up in hospital, there's around 16.9 cases per 100,000 which are unvaccinated, just under 10 per 100,000 in those that have had 2 doses of the vaccine. If you look at older adults, those over 60, 100 cases per 100,000 unvaccinated compared to 18 cases per 100,000 in the vaccinated. So more and more evidence that vaccine works. And it is really because we are such a vaccinated nation and we have such good booster uptake that we are able to make these relaxations. So I suppose my reflections for business are, please do everything you can to encourage your staff to vaccinate. If you're able to give them paid time to go and get the vaccine or the booster, please do it. Every little nudge helps. And from your point of view, it will reduce the sickness absence, it will reduce the length of time people are off. It also has a big impact on isolation. So the guidelines remain that if you are unvaccinated and you're in contact with someone who's positive, you don't get to use the daily testing exemption. You have to isolate for 10 days. So it's a really disruptive thing if people are unvaccinated in terms of how much sickness absence that will cause as well. So I think there are things that employers can do to encourage vaccination, encourage awareness, and we've been refreshing the vaccine toolkits on the council website to help. The NHS has been doing an amazing job getting pop-ups all over the place to increase access to vaccination. For large employers, if you have a large unvaccinated workforce, you run a factory or something like that, where you know you've got a lot of staff that are still vaccine hesitant, please reach out to us. The Chamber will help connect you to my team, and we can arrange for someone to come and talk to your staff, or we can arrange for the vaccine bus to come if you've got a reasonable number of staff who need the jab as well. Looking to the future, well, it's a crystal ball moment, and I know this is one of the bits that you most value. So crystal ball wise, we do know that Omicron you can catch if you've had Delta, and it's one of the things that is more challenging is that Omicron, reinfection with Omicron seems much more common than it is with any of the previous variants of the virus. And that's why at the moment the guidance remains, if you test positive, you isolate for 10 days, and let's say 2 weeks later you test positive again, we treat that as a new infection. Whereas previously we might have ignored it. Because Omicron can reinfect you, it is more challenging. And that's why I say keep up the masks, keep up the hand washing, keep up the ventilation. Ventilation is much more important now than we thought in the first wave. So really important step. I suspect what will happen is it'll now start to calm down. The NHS will remain under pressure for about another week or two, and then things will gradually get easier through to Easter, and we'll have a relatively calm summer. I suspect that we will see a new variant of the virus appear in the autumn, probably from the Southern Hemisphere, where there are large populations who are unvaccinated. And those populations, you're much more likely to see variant. That's how Omicron developed, particularly in countries with high levels of HIV. So I suspect we will have a 5th wave in the winter. And therefore, I suspect that we probably will have another round of vaccine in the winter. Most likely that'll be the start of an annual kind of vaccination cycle for the next couple of years, because until a larger proportion of the world is vaccinated, sadly, COVID's going to be with us. And we now need to really talk about living with COVID, I think, rather than battling with COVID. And that's going to be the big shift, I think. So I think my hope is we will have a more stable year, be less of an in-out year than last year. But I think that's important, that we all continue to kind of respect the fact that the virus is still with us. It's still putting people in hospital, it's still keeping people. And those things are really important to keep in mind when you think about how you bring people back into the office or back into work. Wearing masks, ventilating well, hand sanitizer and hand washing are small prices to pay to enable us to have a pretty relaxed and free year. So I would encourage all businesses to continue to keep that up, and also to reflect on some of the gains we've had from people working from home and thinking how we create a mentally healthy workforce and a mentally healthy approach to work, which supports some of the benefits as well as increasing our approach to hopefully a bounce back economy. So I hope that's been helpful, Henrietta. Happy to take any questions you want to highlight.
That has indeed. Thank you, Justin. And a big vote of thanks that I'll echo in the chat from Louise, thanking you for your regular, calm, useful communications and saying how lucky we are to have you in Birmingham. And just a nod to you and your team, who I know must be under an extraordinary amount of pressure, continuing after already 2 years in the game on this. So thank you so much. Really positive news on vaccination and the impact that's having, but that timely reminder, particularly to businesses on this call, that it's not over just yet, and there's a few simple, responsible steps we can all take to help make sure we don't go back into the cycle of lockdowns, which I think we'd all prefer to avoid. As a cheeky plug, we are working with Birmingham City Council on a Business Champions programme. So to all those listening on the call, if you are thinking of yourselves as a responsible employer around COVID-19, or you're thinking about what more you might be able to do and help spread the word on, please do get in touch. There's those really nice resources that Justin talked about, and it's a good way to keep in the loop on what's happening, as well as modelling what it looks like to be a responsible employer through COVID. So thank you very much. We do have a couple of quick questions, and I will ask them to you now rather than make you wait to the end so that you can dash off your holiday. So we had a question from Beverly, which I think you've already touched on, which was how soon after catching and recovering from the virus can one be reinfected? And it sounds like pretty quickly with Omicron.
Yeah, what we're seeing is that the Omicron is leaning more to the kind of common cold end of the coronavirus family, whereas Alpha and Delta lent more towards the SARS end. And that's a combination of it is slightly milder. We are seeing more diverse symptoms. People certainly seem to complain much more about fatigue, and you know, this hitting them really hard. Brain fuzziness, that kind of cloudy feeling is much more reported. We have had a couple of cases with people reinfected 2 weeks after they've had Delta and then they caught Omicron. And it looks like natural immunity with Omicron wears off over about 4 to 5 weeks. Seems to be a much faster drop off from your natural protection. I have asked national colleagues to look at that and to look about what should be the advice, because as Kieran said in the chat, you know, the advice previously would be don't do another PCR for 90 days after your first PCR. And where we're picking up these reinfections is with lateral flow. So people are doing a lateral flow 2, 3, 4 weeks after they come out of isolation, and that's becoming a positive when it's previously been negative. And I suppose that's the thing I would say to look out for. If you've got someone who's had COVID, definitely, they've come out, they're doing their regular lateral flows, and negative, 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 and then suddenly you get the positive, that's where you start to think reinfection. That's different from the PCR, where people just stay positive for 90 days, and it takes quite a long time for that to disappear. So really you're looking at reinfection, picking it up through the lateral flow testing.
Fantastic, thank you. And a question from Eileen about your stats. Where can we get hold of them?
Yeah, so I'm hoping to get them into next week's local outbreak engagement board slides. I had them at my fingertips because of a presentation I'm doing for the Chinese Community Centre next week with our elderly Chinese community, and they needed them translated before I flew. So that's why I had them there. But they will be out next week, and Henrietta, I'll make sure that update slide pack goes to the chamber, perhaps to link through next week's cascade out to businesses.
Fantastic. And I think we have a few comments. But aside from that, they're all just saying thank you very much for the excellent information as always. So we'll send you back to your wonderful holiday in New York. Thank you so much again, Justin. And we will share those stats when they come through. Have a wonderful rest of the week. Now, onto a slightly different topic today, although of course there's been plenty of innovation when it's come to vaccination and treating COVID. But as a slightly different take on innovation, I'd like to bring in Abby Bell now, who's Head of External Communications at National Express, and has been working on some pretty exciting innovative technologies in the space of transport. So Abby, over to you.
Thanks, Henrietta. Next slide already, please, Jess. That's just my name. Yeah, so I thought this being the QBR, I'd give you a kind of quick roundup of how we are hopefully coming out of COVID. And as Dr. Barney said, hopefully this year will be a little bit less of a nightmare. So in the West Midlands, we have seen bus patronage stay higher, recover quicker, and stay recovered better than the UK average. Basically, back in November, before Omicron really kind of hit, we were back up at kind of like 80% passengers, which was pretty good when you consider how many people are working from home. What this has really shown us is that bus customers, on the whole, can't work from home. You know, we're taking the people to work that are key workers. They can't do their job from the dining rooms. But on the other hand, that does mean that, you know, our recovery has been stronger than rail, it's been stronger than London, it's been stronger than kind of the rest of the UK. And alongside that kind of, you know, demographic, we've had faster growth and better recovery than we thought. Partly we did some quite revolutionary things, which all the other bus companies are not doing. We cut our fares in July 2020. We cut our fares back down to 2014 levels. And we have worked out the figures now, and we think we've got 6% more passengers than we would have done. We also put literally about £1 million into a marketing campaign. And the other thing that we did ahead of the rail industry was we realised that people were having real difficulty planning even like next week. So we kind of looked at our bundling of tickets, and you can buy things like, you know, 3-day, 5-day, you can do capping. So you just pay it on your bank card or your phone app on your bank app on your phone, or you can just buy like a 5-day bundle, and you can kind of like turn them on the day that you want to travel. So you just turn on that one, and you've still got some left in the wallet. You turn them on whenever. So we have really tried to, you know, make it easy for people that they don't have to be signed up to, you know, a monthly ticket or a weekly ticket if actually they're not doing that anymore. Next slide, please, Jess. So that was the last diesel bus that we ever bought back in 2019. She's called Janet, and she's tootling around Coventry right now. And in, when was it? Oh yeah, February 2020, we went out really big and went, yes, our whole 16,000 buses will, 1,600 buses will be zero emission by 2030. Oh yes, the white coach fleet will be zero emission by 2035. Really confident, leading the way, first big bus operator to say this. Next slide, please, Jess. And then you know what happened. So obviously COVID hit, and we had to, oh, excuse me, this lovely man here basically redid the whole of the bus schedule in the whole of the West Midlands 10 times in that first year, and he's still smiling, which is amazing. Interesting what the doctor was saying about ventilation. We did a lot of this because it was something that was in our control. So early doors, we actually looked at ventilation really closely. Literally, I've seen videos of the engineers with like little strips of paper all around where the people sit and around in the driver's cab, and then tweaking the kind of air conditioning in the driver's cab and opening the window to make sure that we've got maximum ventilation coming in. And they've got a little card in the cab now that tells the drivers how to set their cabs for the maximum ventilation. We figured out that actually our buses open their doors every 2 minutes, so we're pretty confident that there's a whole load of fresh air coming in every 2 minutes. And overall, over 2 years, we found that despite all our drivers being out there every day for, you know, the buses are out there 21 hours a day in all kinds of, you know, weathers and everything, that we had a consistently lower rate of infection than the UK average. So I think we were getting something right, touch wood. Next slide, please. So despite COVID and all the nightmares it brought, we just carried on with our zero emission pledge. We decided that we'd said it, we were going to have to do it, and there was no point waiting, because if we want this clean air, if we want to start hitting our carbon targets, we've got to get on with it. You can't really wait around, because all of that is, you know, still emissions going out every day. So basically in 2020 we took delivery of 29 fully electric double-decker buses. 19 that live at Yardley Wood and go out on the 6th to Solihull, and 10 that do the kind of university hospital route in Coventry. So there's some figures there. People always ask me how far do they go before you have to charge them? Basically 200 kilometers, that's what, 160 miles. So they go out all day and then they come back and they charge overnight. So we don't have to charge them in the day. And we've got this really clever smart charge system which works out which bus needs charging. It displays them all on a screen and it shows you when they're out, how much charge they need. Obviously, we had to train our drivers to drive. If you've ever driven an electric car, you have to drive it really, really differently, and they have to drive to conserve the charge, because if you cane it, you just drain the juice really, really quickly, and then we have to come out and rescue you. So basically, we've calculated how much CO2 they've stopped going out into the atmosphere, and it's 1,500 tonnes in a year. So that's why we carried on with it, really, because if we hadn't, that would have those benefits wouldn't have been realised. Next slide, please, Jess. And then just in December, we started operating. These are Birmingham City Councils. They they spent years getting EU funding. The LEP put some money in. There's all sorts of funding for the infrastructure and the vehicles that they managed to kind of get together into enough to make all this happen. And 6th of December, out they went, carrying passengers, amazing hydrogen buses, the only ones in England outside London, made in Northern Ireland. They're really gorgeous. There's all the stats that they do. They also save carbon, they save NOx going out, so they clean the air. If anyone asks, they can do 300k on a single tank. So obviously hydrogen, you can go for longer before you have to refuel it. So that's what we're thinking. I think we're thinking that it's a bit horses for courses. You can run electrics on kind of your shorter routes, but for your longer routes, and obviously we run coaches. So for intercity coaches, we think some things are going to have to be hydrogen. So now we've got them both, both sets running. We can compare the data, we can compare the routes, we can compare how they perform in like the rain and the snow, and decide which routes and which garages ultimately are going to be electric and are going to be hydrogen. So it is all quite exciting. Next slide, please, Jess. We've just announced this actually yesterday on Midlands Today. We've signed the order for 130 double-deckers for Coventry all-electric bus city, and that's why that picture of that van is there, because when they say all-electric bus city, they mean all-electric. So even like the runaround, the garage van has to be electric. So we've put solar panels on the roof. We're working with Coventry City Council and GFWM to make sure there's enough electricity coming in, which hopefully eventually will work for other things as well. So the future, I've put the future, but it's already happening. So hopefully they'll be here quite soon. So all the buses in Coventry will be electric, which will be amazing. Next slide, please. Right, so hydrogen buses. Transport for West Midlands have got a bid in for more of these hydrogen buses under the Zero Emission Bus Regional Area. See what they did there? Scheme. So that's in with DfT, putting a huge kind of bid for these buses. We're waiting to hear back from DfT. So fingers crossed, we will get some more hydrogen. So they'll be out on more of the streets of Birmingham. They won't be going to Coventry because Coventry's all electric, but they'll be going out to Solihull and the Black Country. So fingers crossed that hopefully I'll have something to tell you soon that we're getting more hydrogen buses. Next slide, please. Yeah, and I think this was just a quick summing up of kind of innovation. Really interesting what Joe was saying about how you have to just kind of like grab that opportunity and do what works. I think what we've ended up doing is a kind of slightly different amalgam of working with different partners and getting different pots of funding in different places. So the Coventry setup is a bit different from the Birmingham setup. The Zebra thing will be different again. And I think that's what we've had to do, is just kind of like not kind of go, oh, we'll always do it like this. It's new. So we've just had to kind of grab the opportunity when it came. Working with all sorts of different partners, that's been really interesting. That's been really useful. I think it's really, really important for innovation that you're not in danger of, the next political party coming in either at a council level or a mayoral level and suddenly going, oh no, I'm pulling the plug because the previous people did that. And that's why we've got our picture of Sir Keir Starmer up by the hydrogen bus. And I think yesterday on Midlands Today, when they had they featured the order of the electric buses, we had Jim O'Boyle from Coventry City Council, which is the Labour Council, obviously, and we had the Mayor standing up there, both saying exactly the same thing. So I think that's really encouraging, that when you have like really great innovation that works and that can benefit so many people, that if you've got cross-party support, then hopefully that just becomes something that, well, this is obvious, this is going to have to happen. We're not going to suddenly change our minds about this. And I suppose, yeah, cutting quickly to my question is kind of when we're always really interested in this, we talk about it incessantly here, it's kind of like, when is that tipping point where everybody realise that everybody can't drive everywhere in a single use vehicle, single occupancy vehicle, and as the bus company we have to be ready. And that's basically why we did all this innovating despite COVID, because we thought if that tipping point comes soon, and if that tipping point weirdly is even accelerated by what's happened with COVID, you know, people have started walking, they have started cycling, it has become more, well, looking at Digbeth, it's impossible to drive down Digbeth High Street. We have to be ready, so we have to have lovely buses. There's no point everyone kind of going, oh, I might get the bus now, and the buses are rubbish, or they're not there, or they don't turn up. So that's why we've just worked our hearts out for the last 2 years, despite everything, to be ready, because that tipping point, I think, will be slow, and then when it comes, it will be quick. And if we're not ready, we're not going to catch all those people and help them do the right thing. So basically, I think that's it from me. Thank you very much. If there's any questions, I'll do my best to answer them, or I'll email one of my engineers and they can answer them for me.
Fantastic, thank you, Ali. And I can already see plenty of love for the hydrogen buses in the chat. Do keep sending your questions in, everyone. And that really good point for us all to reflect on. It's the same across all industries, sometimes different topics, but same question: when is the tipping point? What is it that's going to really fundamentally drive that big shift in behaviour? I also really liked your reference to pragmatic partnerships. I think that's a brilliant way of thinking about one of the foundations for innovation. Now, Tracy, I'd like to bring you in next for a slightly different take on regional innovation. So over to you to introduce yourself. Then we're going to do a bit of a double act. So I've got some questions to ask you about your take on this agenda.
Yeah, thank you very much, Henrietta. And I really enjoyed that, actually, Ali, especially because of the work, obviously, I do with the DFT. So that was really, really interesting. As you say, Henrietta, we said we'd do a bit of questions, but I've got a few sort of scene setting thoughts, I guess, before we do that, if that's okay, just to kind of reflect on some of the organisations I'm involved with and kind of what that means from an innovation perspective in the region. Raj said to me quite recently, God, you must see loads of different things going on because you're involved with so many organisations. And I'd not really reflected on it in that way before. But actually, he's right. Almost all the organisations I'm involved in some capacity are involved in innovation. And Jo mentioned in her opening remarks around the government innovation strategy and what that means. And I think that's quite an interesting sort of catalyst. What I was really sort of reassured to hear was when Raj did his overview in the stats. Doesn't feel misplaced at the moment, does it, to start talking about innovation again? You know, we can start talking about it in a louder voice than maybe we might have done previously. Now, my career has always been involved in tech. You know, I spent 30 years at SEC, the local tech firm. You know, I actually was involved in the tech sector right at the very beginning. I remember the launch of the PC. I am that old. So I've seen technological change, you know, at pace, you know, through a variety of different things. And, you know, I think that's been quite a privilege, actually. And I've often described it as being on a roller coaster. You know, sometimes you're going through the loop-de-loop and sometimes it's a little bit more measured, but it's never dull. What that means, I think, from an innovation perspective is I do have a tendency to view innovation through the prism of technology. You know, that's a natural thing. But I did read in the government strategy that they have identified AI, digital and computing as one of the 7 technology families where they think the UK has got opportunity and strength. So I think I'm okay to probably do that. But I guess the point for me around innovation is I've never particularly regarded tech as being that exciting for itself. It's about what it does. And if I think about a lot of the organisations I'm involved in, you know, it always comes back to the same thing. What's the impact around it? You know, picking up on Ali around the Department for Transport, you know, I've been involved with them for 5 years as a non-exec, you know, and seeing the discussion around new technologies and sort of thinking about where that's going to take us. And I think as a region, we've got so much opportunity there that we need to take advantage of. So I think that's really exciting. And equally, when we look at things like 5G with the West Midlands 5G company, you know, so many of the things that are involved there are all about new things that we don't quite know where the tipping point is, but we know it's coming. So I'm really excited. And I suppose my closing, my closing point would be, it would be really wrong of me not to talk about Steam House, Joe, and what Birmingham City University, I think probably I would never be allowed back in the university if I don't mention Steam House. But it's more than that. It's that capitalisation of what's happening at Steam House and what goes on at Bruntwood SciTech, Innovation Birmingham campus, and what happens with HS2 and Aston, and the creation of the knowledge quarter. And actually, that really will be about driving innovation in a placemaking point. And probably just one final comment before we start to talk. In a second, Henrietta, is you mentioned before, I'm chair at Curium, and Curium are a chain of patrons. And I think what we've noticed and what we've identified is that organisations underestimate the importance of people and culture in terms of successful innovation and growth so many times. I think what we've done at Curium is we've successfully thought about how you tie transformation to culture and people. And it proves time and time again that you can have the most innovative product, but if you don't get the people aspect of it right, you are probably doomed to failure. So that's probably a point to stop and for us to start chatting, I guess.
Fantastic. Thank you, Tracy. So with all of your many hats on and everything you see across the region as well as nationally, what are the current opportunities to maximise innovation in Greater Birmingham?
I think we've worked, I think there's probably quite a few things to that. I think, first of all, the fact that we've now got a UK government strategy around innovation, which has got money identified, is really important. But I think what we've got within the city region is we've got a culture of innovation. We've got a culture of collaboration. We've got some fantastic organisations. I've run through them very quickly, but you know what's going on with the application accelerator, for example, with WM5G. They've put 400 companies so far have taken advantage of that. I've mentioned the Innovation Birmingham campus. They've incubated and grown 170 businesses in the time that they've been there. So I think the opportunity is that we capitalise on the asset base that we've got, and that we take advantage of the fact that there's a Build Back Better strategy, there's money available. And then on top of that, capitalise on the fact that we've got some fantastic, academic institutions. If you bring all of those things together and look at what creates a really good innovation community, we've got all of those things. I think it's up to us to seize that opportunity and kind of take advantage of it, really.
Fantastic. So we've already got the right people, the right institutions all together in the right place to really drive this forward. So when it comes to what might put businesses off getting involved in innovation activity, do you see there as being any barriers or perceived barriers that businesses come across?
I've got some concerns, I guess, and I often do reflect on this. Innovation is business oxygen. It's the thing. We ignore it at our peril. I think it's something that often organisations think, well, maybe it's not us. I thought Tim Cook summed it up perfectly. Some people see innovation as change. We never really see it like that. It's about making things better. And I think when organisations think of it in that frame, actually it becomes a lot easier to think about. But I would say that the last 2 years have demonstrated that the need to adapt and innovate has never been more acute. We've seen organisations change in weeks, decisions that probably they've been machinating about maybe for years, but suddenly because of necessity, they've made change. Now, that's not really innovating, that's crisis management. So I guess the challenge for all organisations is to make sure that they are thinking about how they continually change and improve and take advantage, rather than necessarily just respond when there's a crisis. And I just want to hammer the point home a little bit. I often use these as examples. If we think about the impact that Uber had on the taxi industry, we think about the impact Airbnb had on the hotel sector and Deliveroo and Just Eats on food sector, never mind what eBay and Amazon did. Those changes took years. I don't think I think that the precedent is different. I don't think change now is going to take years. I think the pace of technological change is certainly accelerating. So I think any organisation that's not at least thinking about change, they don't have to think about innovation, they just have to think about change. Or if they're not thinking about that, then I think that is a real risk. Now, the good news is, which I think is probably answering your question, isn't it? The really good news is we have got lots of institutions and organisations who want to help, who can navigate and signpost, across the whole spectrum of whether that's universities, whether it's financial institutions, whether it's government bodies, it doesn't matter who they are. We've got lots of those assets in the region. What it's about reaching out and connecting, and that's, I guess, where the chamber comes into it as well. Making those connections. I think that the barriers are doing nothing.
Fantastic. And as you say, businesses have proven time and time again over the last 2 years how quickly can change when they need to.
Yeah.
And then moving that into that mindset of continually adapting, evolving, as you say, making things better rather than necessarily thinking about innovation as something that happens in a little think tank over here. It's the whole business making things better. Fantastic. You've already touched on some of the support structures that enable innovation in the region. Are there any in particular that you'd recommend that businesses keep an eye out for?
Yeah, there's a few actually. I read with real excitement that Venture Fest is happening again. I think it's on the 24th of March, and that's brilliant because that's a great place for entrepreneurs and people who are interested in new ideas to get together. And we haven't had a Venture Fest for a couple of years because of COVID, and the fact that that's happening in March I think is really exciting. I think looking at the various funds of money that are available, Jo mentioned in her opening address, didn't she, that there's £22 billion worth of money available for supporting R&D, which is fantastic. But there are also some more specific areas to look at as well. You've got the £25 million of funding for connecting capability, which is about driving economic growth through university business innovation. So working with the BCU or UOB in terms of what they're doing to help access some of those funds, I think would be a really smart move. Our institutions are very, very good at understanding how to navigate some of the processes that take place in terms of that, but also as well starting to think about the 7 technology families and kind of looking at some of the new technology areas. I thought Ali's presentation around the hydrogen and the electric, but the hydrogen bus conversation was fascinating because those are the futures, and we've got such a fantastic heritage, haven't we, around transport. We know that we've built it for years, for generations, but actually we've also got a brilliant story to talk about within the region in terms of the future of transport, and that's really important, isn't it, because that drives the knowledge economy, and that's where the really high value the impact comes for jobs and things like that. But I guess if I had a call to action, I often, I'm going to name some people. Probably if I was working in a business right now and I wanted to tap into some of the key people in the ecosystem, I'd contact Joe Birch or Julian Beer at BCU to find out about Steamhouse and what's going to happen there. I'd contact Leslie Holt, who is responsible for the application accelerator at the West Midlands 5G, and ask her how to get involved in that. I'd contact through LinkedIn, because he's really prolific on LinkedIn, Andy Dawson at Curium, to find out what they're doing to help accelerate culture and innovation and people. And I'd contact David Hardman around the Knowledge Quarter and find out what that's going to do. So I would actually make some specific effort to contact specific people in the city region. And I'd contact you to find out what you could do to help connect me to all those people. That would be my specific call to action.
Fantastic. So much is done through networks and sharing knowledge, isn't it? As soon as you find the key people, they can help you navigate any system. And as we always say at the Chamber, odds are if we don't do it ourselves, we know the people that do. It is brilliant getting into those business networks.
Exactly.
So, final question, looking ahead, where do we go from here?
Oh, where do we go from here? I think we need to take advantage. There's a window of opportunity. for the country as well as for the region. You know, innovation is really important as well to addressing some of the productivity challenges and some of the things that will enable the UK to compete on a global basis. That's what the strategy, for example, is all about. You know, it's intended to try and help us move forward in a post-Brexit world and probably post-COVID world now. You know, I think that goes without saying. So I think where we go from here is we have to do something. We have to kind of take some action. Probably a call out to some of the stakeholders that I've mentioned is maybe we need to think about, you know, events that we can put on to kind of get people back in now the world is changing. Maybe we could ask some of the people who are on this call some things that they would really like to hear more about. And I think we need to start talking about what's going on in the region, you know, at a much, maybe we're not very boastful in this region, aren't we? We're quite modest, and maybe we need to be a little bit more boastful about some of the things that are going on that are making a difference. There are some fantastic new ideas. You know, we have got a couple of unicorn businesses. We know that Tech Nation are telling us that. You know, there is so much to shout about, and I think if we can put all of that information out there and start talking about ourselves, maybe we can build on the investment, you know, the FDI investment that goes on, but maybe it's more than that. Maybe we can take advantage of some of the great stuff that's happening. I was reading a Tech Nation report a couple of days ago, you know, and the UK is only just behind the US and China for venture capital investment in innovation. So we kind of just need to take advantage of these things, don't we?
Thank you very much, Tracy, and I couldn't agree more with that. Connect, really confident about what we've got coming down the line and what's already here. As a cheeky plug, we do have an Innovate UK Edge team here at the Greater Birmingham Chambers of Commerce. So if you are currently thinking of an innovative product, innovative service, and you're looking for someone to help shepherd you around those systems, around knowledge transfer partnerships with universities, around applying for Innovate UK funding, the Innovate UK Edge team are fantastic at helping you navigate around that. So do get in touch. Now, can I call back all of our panelists to the screen, please, to pop their cameras back on? Because we have a first question through in the chat, and please do add in any more if anyone has any questions, which is from your aforementioned Andy Dawson from Curium Solutions. So Andy highlighted environmental and social governance, and he had a particular question to Raj. I will open it up to the panelists. Andy's been at our Good Business Forum, our new member-only networking group around ESG, CSR, social value type activity, and was looking at the importance of ESG and wondered, Raj, whether there's any mention of ESG in sort of comments from those taking part in the quarterly business report. For those who haven't come across ESG, I should restate it's environmental and social governance and ways of thinking about business's purpose and impact on the world. So I'll start with Raj. Any feedback from businesses so far on ESG related agendas?
Yeah, so I don't think they specifically use that term, but we did have a lot of businesses share their concerns about the impact of rising energy prices on their business, and thinking about not just how they can be reduced, but also how we can be more effective in energy usage in this country. And again, I think it comes back to that element around innovation. So how can we, for example, store energy more efficiently? What are the new methods that we can look to introduce as smaller businesses to embark on that net zero journey? And what I would suggest to those people is direct them to the work we did on our sustainable business campaign. So if you're not familiar with it, I know a number of the panelists involved and the companies on this call were involved, but it was a 4-week campaign we ran last year around the run up to COP26, which is all about helping businesses who are looking to embark on that net zero journey, covering areas such as energy, transport, circular economy, and sustainable business management. So all lots of welcome input from lots of different businesses doing loads of cool stuff across the region. All the information is available on our website, and I'll share a link in the chat function as well if anyone's not familiar with it.
Fantastic, thank you, Raj. And Ali, there was a lot around environment and environmental impacts in your presentation with the fantastic innovations that National Express have been bringing in. On that wider view around environmental and social governance, is that something that's front of mind for National Express?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think we are guilty of it. We get all carried away with our beautiful new buses and the zero technology and blah, 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 and you can breathe in the exhaust, you know, straight through your nose, blah, blah, blah. The fact is that, you know, if you get even one of our oldest buses, that's still, you know, for a 5-mile journey, that still emits less carbon than if you go in a car, basically, half as much. So I think what we can help with is obviously a lot of companies that don't have massive fleet like we do, their scope 3 emissions are probably something that eventually under ESG they're going to have to start looking at, you know, quite soon. And I think that's something that we can really help with, is almost helping other people with their scope 3 emissions, which is basically how do you get your staff to work. I read a thing the other day that said the NHS, I think 5% of the NHS's carbon footprint is their staff coming to work, and another 7% is their patients and visitors coming to, you know, health sites. So, you know, we can really, really easily kind of take care of that bit, because I understand that the rest of the stuff that they've got to deal with is kind of like, I think it's kind of drug packaging, which is like a whole thing that needs, you know, kind of globally unpicking. So I think we're definitely trying to obviously market ourselves, but just go, look, this is really easy. You can get your staff bus, you know, cheap bus tickets. You can have them delivered through your intranet, and that's kind of taking care of a massive big chunk of your scope 3 emissions, so that you can then sign up and go, oh, well, you know, I've got mode shift stars. Here's my plan. Tick, tick, tick. Because, you know, the pressure, we have noticed that the pressure is on from, I think BlackRock said something about it yesterday, you know, the new unicorns are not necessarily the startups, they are the companies that start taking this stuff really seriously really soon.
Henrietta, can I be rude and just interrupt there? So I've had quite a lot of board meetings this week with lots of different sectors. Speaking to the manufacturing sector, we have an employer advisory board, and the thing that they're obsessing about is scope 3, because obviously that, you know, that's a kind of unknown, and it could be a real problem, as in adding to net zero, or it can be a solution. And it was interesting. So in local authorities, I had another meeting around construction and retrofit and scope 3 and that, and then in manufacturing, again, another conversation about scope 3. So, you know, if scope 3 can be part of your solution, it can also be a burden, and understanding what scope 3 means for your business is probably something worthy of looking at if you've got a net zero ambition. So it's funny, Ali, I was just thinking scope 3 and buses, there's an easy win, and it came out of your mouth, so forgive me for interrupting.
It's always good when there's a perfect solution already there on the call. And Tracy, from your perspective, you know, perhaps maybe from the Curium side, more of the social side as well as the environmental side, is that something that you're seeing and hearing?
Yeah, I think so. I think that the packaging of ESG in its broadest sense, I think, is probably the single most important thing that most boards are wrestling with at the moment, in all honesty. But yeah, I think that the different sort of components of what that actually means on a very practical basis. But I think the point that Raj made is right. It's not always talked about in that way, but actually you can see that it's the various focuses. I suppose the concern about those organisations who perhaps aren't thinking about it in some detail, because maybe it's just a little bit too downstream, or maybe there's more urgent pressures, is I guess what we've seen over the last 2 years is what goes on at a macro level can affect individual businesses really, really quickly, in a way that probably if we went back 3 years and said this is what's going to happen, I'd probably have been carted off to the funny farm, because nobody would have believed any of what's gone on in the last 2 years. And I guess the concern is some of these things do sound a little bit esoteric, they do sound a little bit nebulous, and organisations going, okay, well, we'll get to that. Actually, I don't think they can afford to wait too long to get to that. I think that there are pressures that are coming, and they're big pressures that absolutely can be front and centre, you know, in front of every business before they know it. And I suppose that's my I'm normally a very optimistic person naturally, but that is one of the concerns I've got about this particular topic.
I'd agree, and certainly what I'm hearing from particularly larger businesses tend to be further down the track on this, but are already starting to talk, or already doing, passing that on through their supply chains. So eventually this will trickle down through every layer of business. You know, it sort of started with public sector and looking at social value, but I'm hearing more and more from private sector businesses who are thinking, actually, what are my supply chain doing in this? You know, how are my suppliers demonstrating good governance, how they're looking after their workforce? You know, we've already had things around modern slavery. It's all about sort of move out from there to businesses understanding their wider impacts on the world, knowing how to articulate it. And I have to say, it's one of the nice things I've noted. Actually, there's a lot that businesses do already that if you just articulate it in the right way can fit into this. It's not 100% new. There's lots of things that businesses have already done that fit into this. Just thinking about that holistic impact and how you're managing that and being a responsible business. Tracy, were you going to come back in there? I've got a question from Matt to come in.
No. I was probably going to make an observation about I'm trying to think of the right phraseology, I guess. But I think that there is an impact that that we're seeing, which is coming from younger demographics, their view of the world, their ability, their problem-solving capability. You know, particularly you know, the younger generation who have grown up only knowing technology means that they think differently. They see problems differently, and I think their view of macro problems, you know, geo problems, is different. And I think that they probably do look at my generation and others and think, you know, how the hell have you never solved this? Because it's really obvious what to do. And I think that's where the pressure is coming from. I think that's where the pace is coming from. And I think that's where the acceleration is coming from. I think it's an interesting time to be alive, let's say.
Absolutely. Now, question from Matt Jones. It sounds like there is much opportunity in encouraging innovation and some great schemes in place to foster this. So what are the steps we could all do at an organisation level in Greater Birmingham to nurture innovation at all levels? And what are the obvious quick wins? Who would like to come in first on that one? I'm going to come back to you then, Tracy, because you'd mentioned people, which is a part that we haven't talked about as much. So do you want to start on people, and then I will come back to the other points.
Yeah, I think the important thing about innovation is it doesn't flow neatly in one direction, does it? It's not a linear process. It is unpredictable. It does require connections. You know, I don't think it's any secret that the Serendip program in Innovation Birmingham is called Serendip. You know, it's about serendipitous connections, and really that's what innovation is about. And you do that when you bring those people together, those situations together. So I think it's a reinforcement of what I've already said, really. You know, we have got those facilities, and it's about encouraging businesses to come into those environments, to go to Steamhouse, to connect to CMS. And I noticed in the chat there's a few links. I think you know, that and I think it's really important to do that. But it is to make connections, and even if it's that first step of connecting through LinkedIn, you know, reaching out to Ali to find out a little bit more about hydrogen buses. I've mentioned reaching out to Andy to talk about people and leadership. You know, connecting. You know, social media has demonstrated that we all can do that, but actually, you know, innovating is an extension of that process, isn't it? You know, I'm a great believer that, you know, getting people together will fire off all kinds of ideas. So it's about taking advantage of the structure that exists, but also taking advantage of just a little bit of serendipitous connections as well.
Fantastic.
Can I build? Is it okay to build on that? It just Tracy will know that I love what she said, because I must put collaboration in practically every post I put on social media. And experimentation, of course, is really important, which things like Innovation Birmingham and Steamhouse enable you to do. But I was really interested in Ali's first point, which is about understanding your customer needs. So many great ideas come from understanding what your customers want, their pains. So Ali understands that her customers aren't going to be working from home, and therefore making the schedule, you know, scheduling buses and meeting their needs becomes paramount. A lot of the great innovations that we've been doing over the last 2 years with members are about them understanding their customers. And I think some businesses underinvest in that space, and it's a real opportunity for innovation.
Fantastic, thank you, Jo. I'm conscious of time. We're actually out of time. So all I will do to recap is say it's like you say, understanding your customers, finding those serendipitous conversations and then turning them into those pragmatic partnerships that Annie talked about as one of the foundations to innovation. So a really good sort of look at how you can use people and knowledge to really drive forward innovation. Thank you so much, all of our panelists. As I say, I think we could carry on with this conversation late into the evening, but we are technically out of time. So for our delegates who may be heading off to their dinners, I will wrap up. So thank you again so much for your contributions today. It's such an important topic. As a quick plug, we've talked a little bit about people, innovation and change. We are going to be running our Growth Through People again at the Growth Through People campaign, even again at the Chamber in March this year. It'll be the 5th year that we've run it, but it's all about how investment in leadership and people management skills can help improve productivity in business. And this year, of course, with everything that's happened, lots of takes on leadership through change, leading hybrid workforces, mental health and well-being, and all of those bits of looking after the people who drive the innovation in businesses. Watch this space because we'll be formally launching the event and conference on Monday. That's it from me. Thank you all so much for joining us and look forward to seeing you all on a future Quarterly Business Report. Have a good evening, everyone.